Hi everyone and welcome to Phil's Fun Fact Friday from Team Vincent Motorsports in Ayr, Ontario. Today we're looking at the original snowmobile suspension. That's right, the Bogie wheel suspension. It was simple. Simple springs, no shocks, wheels, no sliders. It was simple, the sleds were simple, but gosh, did these things ever work well for that era. The Bogie wheel suspension was so simple, but it just worked so well. The sleds were low power. The speed was low. It was all about just cruising around out in the back of the woodlot, the back of the friend's farm, over to the cabin. It was just about riding locally with family and friends. So the suspension, ideal for the times. The maintenance on the Bogie wheel suspension was pretty simple. All you had to do was make sure you greased them. If you didn't, they'd start to seize up, and next you know they'd pop off. You'd be going down your laneway or down the next road and look over, there one goes past you. So you had to keep them greased. Another problem that was kind of funny was you'd be bouncing around jumping drifts and your buddies start pointing at the rear suspension because these things would flip upside down. Suddenly, instead of 3 sets of bogies, you'd have 2 because this one would be bouncing around. You have to pull over, flip it back down, and keep going. So the Bogie wheel suspension started in the early 60s. Right through until the early to mid 70s. Ski-Doo started going to a slide rail suspension in around 1971 to 72. Now ironically, it was actually similar to the Bogie wheel suspension in that there was no shocks. It was simple. It was just spring activated, but with high facts instead of wheels. Now if you look closely at the original slide rail suspension, it was actually hinged. They weren't sure if they wanted to go with a long piece of solid high facts, so they put a hinge in the middle, kind of half Bogie, half slide rail suspension. It's interesting to compare the suspension and the bounce rate. If you look at the original Bogie wheel suspension, it just bounced and kicked right back up. It was like riding a buckboard. Take a look at an up-to-date newer suspension like this R-Motion and watch the rate at which everything activates. There's just so much engineering that goes into the modern rear skid frame. Spring preload, kickback of the shock. It's amazing how much adjustment there is. But in the early days of the Bogies, it was just spring down and kick right back again. So the Bogie wheel suspension, yes, it was simple, but gosh, did it ever work well. For 10 to 15 years, that was the only suspension option you had. Were they rough? Did it ride like a buckboard? Yes, but that's what everybody was used to. It was just fun to go bouncing through the field. Now, there's a lot of things you can do on a new snowmobile, but try doing this with a new high-tech suspension. That's right, it's all about the fun factor in vintage snowmobiling. Thank you so much for watching our Fun Fact Friday video series from Team Vincent Motorsports in Ayr, Ontario.